Max Verstappen just did something at the Nürburgring that should not be possible. Not in that car. Not on that track. Not against those drivers. He didn't just win. He destroyed the field by over a minute, on one of the most dangerous circuits in the world. And here's the part no one can explain. He looked completely in control the entire time. No mistakes. No hesitation. No limits. This isn't just dominance. This is something Formula 1 might not be ready for. Because if a driver can leave F1, enter a completely different category, and still make elite specialists look slow, then what does that say about everyone else? Stay with me, because what really happened in this race is already making teams, drivers, and even the FIA very uncomfortable. Subscribe now, because the truth behind this performance changes everything. It started in a place where Formula 1 drivers are not supposed to look comfortable. The Nurburgring Nordschleife. Over 12 miles of asphalt. Blind corners. Unforgiving barriers. Zero margin for error. This is not a circuit where reputation protects you. This is where reputations collapse. And yet, from the very first lap of the weekend, something felt off. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Just different. Because while other drivers were searching for limits, Verstappen looked like he already knew them. And more importantly, he knew how far beyond them he could go. That's what led to qualifying. And this is where the first real signal appeared. He didn't just take pole position. He took it by nearly 2 seconds. On this track, that gap is not normal. It's not even expected. Because the Nordschleife compresses performance. It hides advantages. It punishes overconfidence. So when someone creates that kind of margin here, it forces a different kind of question. Not how fast is the car, but how far is the driver willing to go? And here's where things get more serious. Because this wasn't a one-lap anomaly. It wasn't a perfect lap that no one could repeat. The long runs told the same story. Consistent pace. Controlled aggression. No visible drop-off. And that combination is rare. Very rare. But most people missed the deeper layer. Because while everyone focused on the gap, very few looked at how it was built. Corner by corner. Input by input. Risk by risk. Because Verstappen wasn't driving like someone adapting to a new category. He was driving like someone removing variables. Eliminating uncertainty. Turning a chaotic circuit into something predictable. And that is where this stops being impressive and starts becoming uncomfortable. Because if a driver can reach that level of control here, on a track designed to create chaos, then what happens when he returns to Formula 1, where everything is already optimized around him? But we're not there yet, because qualifying was only the beginning. And what happened at the start of the race almost broke this entire narrative. The lights go out, and suddenly, everything changes. Because dominance on paper means nothing here. The start at the Nürburgring is not just about reaction time. It's about survival. Cold tires. Heavy fuel. Cars everywhere. And no space to recover if something goes wrong. For a brief moment, Verstappen loses control of the race. An Audi gets through. Aggressive. Precise. Experienced in this exact environment. And just like that, the perfect narrative begins to crack. Because now, this isn't about leading from the front. This is about pressure. Real pressure. The kind that forces mistakes. The kind that exposes limits. And for a few laps, it looks like we're about to get answers. Because the Audi doesn't back off. It pushes harder. Forces tighter lines. Tests braking zones. And Verstappen doesn't respond immediately. He waits. He studies. He adapts. And this is where something subtle, but critical, happens. Because most drivers, in that situation, react emotionally. They force a move. They try to recover position instantly. But Verstappen does the opposite. He slows the moment down. He stretches the fight. And without anyone realizing, he starts taking control again. Corner by corner. Sector by sector. Until finally, just before the first pit stop window, he makes the move. Clean. Calculated. No drama. And just like that, the lead is back. But that's not the impressive part. The impressive part is what comes next. Because this is where most drivers breathe. They stabilize. They manage the race. They protect the position. But Verstappen doesn't. He increases the pace. And that decision makes no sense on the surface. Because pushing harder here increases risk. Traffic is coming. Back markers. Slower classes. Unpredictable situations. This is where races are lost, not won. And yet, he leans into it. And this is where the race begins to split into two realities. What everyone sees. And what's actually happening. Because on the outside, it looks like a simple lead change. But underneath, Verstappen is building something. A gap, yes. But more than that, control over every variable in the race. And this is where things start to escalate. Because the race is about to introduce something that even Verstappen cannot fully control. And this is where the race stops being predictable and starts becoming dangerous. Because endurance racing doesn't follow clean scripts. It doesn't reward the fastest car alone. It rewards timing, position, luck, and sometimes chaos. That chaos arrived in the form of strategy. A BMW. Different pit window. Different calculations. A shorter stop, by regulation, giving them track position they didn't have before. And just like that, everything shifts again. Because now, Verstappen is no longer controlling the race from the front. Now he's chasing a variable he didn't create. And this is where things usually go wrong. Because strategy fights are not won on pace alone. They're won in traffic, in timing, in moments you cannot predict. And suddenly, the track becomes crowded. Slower cars, multiple classes, drivers fighting their own races, completely unaware of the battle happening behind them. This is the Nürburgring at its most unforgiving. And right in the middle of it, two completely different approaches collide. The BMW, aggressive, trying to maximize its strategic advantage. The Mercedes, precise, calculating, waiting for the right moment. And Verstappen sits between both worlds. Not forcing, not rushing, but always getting closer. And this is where most people miss the real tension. Because it wasn't about who was leading. It was about who was under pressure. And for the first time in the race, that pressure wasn't on Verstappen. It was on the driver ahead. Because chasing here is different. You see everything. You study everything. You wait for the smallest mistake. And eventually, it comes. A misjudgment in traffic. A split-second decision taken too late. Contact with a slower car. A penalty. And just like that, the entire structure of the race collapses. Not gradually. Instantly. Because in endurance racing, one mistake doesn't cost you seconds. It costs you everything. And now, the fight is over. But here's the part that changes the entire story. Because when the threat disappears, most drivers switch modes. They protect. They manage. They bring the car home. But Verstappen doesn't. He does the exact opposite. He pushes harder. And that decision reveals something no data sheet can explain. Because now, there is no external pressure. No immediate threat. No reason to take risks. And yet, the pace increases. The gap grows. The control tightens. And suddenly, this isn't a race anymore. It's a demonstration. But not of speed. Of something much more unsettling. Because what Verstappen is showing here is not just that he can win. It's that he can decide how the race unfolds. And that kind of control changes everything. Because now, the final phase of this race is no longer about competition. It's about something far more revealing. Something that even Formula One did not expect to see. And then, something happened that no one inside that paddock expected. The race was already under control. The threats were gone. The strategy battles finished. At this point, every experienced team gives the same instruction. Bring the car home. No risks. No unnecessary pace. Protect the result. But Verstappen didn't follow that script. He got back in the car. Not because he had to. Because he chose to. And that decision changes how you need to see everything that came before. Because this was no longer about winning. That part was already secured. This was about something else entirely. Preparation. Execution under pressure. Simulating the final phase of a much bigger race. And suddenly, the Nürburgring stopped being the objective. It became the test. Because what Verstappen was doing in that final stint wasn't normal race behavior. It was deliberate, controlled, almost clinical. He wasn't reacting anymore. He was rehearsing. Pit entry, pit exit, traffic timing, closing laps with full focus even when nothing is at stake. And here's where it becomes uncomfortable. Because while everyone else was surviving the final phase, he was perfecting it. And then, the gap started growing again. Not stabilizing. Not holding. Expanding. Over a minute by the end. In a 4-hour race, that margin doesn't just happen. It doesn't appear by accident. It is built. Lap after lap. Decision after decision. And what makes this even more unsettling is how clean it all looked. No overdriving. No visible corrections. No signs of stress. Just precision. Relentless precision. And this is where the narrative breaks completely. Because now, you can't explain this with the car. You can't reduce it to strategy. You can't dismiss it as circumstance. Because when a driver, with no pressure, no threat, and no reason to push, still chooses to extend the gap, you're looking at something else. Something deeper. Something that goes beyond competition. Because this wasn't about beating others anymore. It was about reaching a level where others simply cannot follow. And inside Formula One, that's where the real concern begins. Not when someone wins, but when someone stops needing the fight to dominate. Because if this is how Verstappen performs, when nothing is on the line, then what happens when everything is? And that's when the reaction started. Not on track, not on timing screens, inside Formula One itself. Because performances like this don't stay isolated. They travel, they get analyzed, they get questioned, and more importantly, they get compared. Drivers saw it. Not just the result, but the way it was achieved. The control, the consistency, the absence of errors on a circuit where errors are inevitable. And that creates something dangerous. Doubt. Because every driver believes in their limits, their reference points, their understanding of what is possible. But when someone steps outside that framework and makes the impossible look routine, it forces a question no one wants to ask. Am I already at my limit, or is there another level I can't reach? And that question spreads fast. Teams felt it too. Because this wasn't just about driving. This was about adaptability. Taking a completely different car, a completely different discipline, a completely different environment, and removing the learning curve entirely. That's not supposed to happen. There are supposed to be gaps, mistakes, adjustment periods. But here, there were none. And that leads to a much bigger concern. Because Formula One is built on specialization. Every detail optimized. Every variable controlled. Drivers trained for one ecosystem. One type of car. One style of racing. But Verstappen just proved that those boundaries might not exist for him. And if that's true, then the advantage is no longer just technical. It's human. And that's much harder to regulate. Even the FIA started paying attention. Not because anything was illegal. Not because any rules were broken, but because of what this represents. Dominance is manageable. It has happened before. But this kind of versatility, this kind of cross-discipline control, that's unpredictable. Because it introduces a variable the sport cannot easily contain. And here's where everything connects. Because this performance wasn't random. It wasn't spontaneous. It was built. Lap by lap. Race by race. Category by category. And all of it is pointing towards something much bigger. The 24 hours of Nurburgring. A race where speed alone is not enough. Where endurance, precision, mental resilience, and adaptability decide everything. And now, Verstappen arrives there with something no one else has. Proof. Proof that he can dominate this environment. Proof that he can handle the chaos. Proof that he can control the uncontrollable. And that changes the entire landscape. Because now, he's not entering that race as a Formula One driver trying something new. He's entering as a reference, as a benchmark, as the driver everyone else has to measure themselves against. And that creates pressure, not just for rivals, but for the sport itself. Because if he wins there too, if he extends this level of performance into endurance racing's biggest stage, then the conversation changes permanently. It's no longer about how good Verstappen is. It becomes about how far ahead he really is. And that leads to the final piece of this story, the one everything has been building toward. Because this wasn't just a race. It was a warning, a preview, a glimpse of something Formula One might not be fully prepared to face. And the real question is no longer what he did at the Nürburgring, but what happens next when he brings this version of himself back to Formula One.